Qianya City began the reorganization process with the full support of the Situ clan. Shen Tianzhan was still staying in the city lord's office to cultivate. The old alliances of the city lord's office had all yielded in submission. Qianya City began the reorganization process with the full support of the Situ clan. Shen Tianzhan was still staying in the city lord's office to cultivate. The old alliances of the city lord's office had all yielded in submission. Gradually, cultivators of the Saint Plains who came with the great shaman took control of the city lord's office and even planned to mobilize more help from Emperor Xia's realm. Since they had now taken a city in Crimson Dragon realm, naturally, it would need to be managed with care. Afterward, the city lord's office built an academy of cultivation in the center of Qianya City, and it caused a lot of talk in the surrounding cities. An academy of cultivation was not suitable for other cities in the Crimson Dragon realm save for the Crimson Dragon City. These cities were continually warring with one another and changed hands often, so the construction of an academy was a waste of time, energy, and resources. The cultivators that came out of the academy would likely end up being used by another. Only the Crimson Dragon City under the direct control of the Crimson Dragon Emperor was a suitable location. Because it was Qianya City, everyone just laughed it off. At the same time, in Emperor Li's realm within the Crimson Dragon region, Dali Dynasty, Emperor Li's Way, Imperial Advisor's residence. At this time, the Imperial Advisor was standing with his hands folded behind his back, staring at the sky. Fei Xue stood quietly next to the Imperial Advisor without disturbing him. At this time, there were footsteps. It was a few disciples of the Imperial Advisor. Yen Yuan, Mr. Nan Zhai, Mu Chunyang, and the others had arrived. Master! Yen Yuan and the others bowed. You all knew, right? The master lowered his head and spoke to them. Yen Yuan nodded. Li Yao and the Prince Regent both reported to the Emperor at the same time to ask the Imperial Advisor of Dali to go to the Crimson Dragon realm and create a territory there. At the same time, it was requested to assassinate someone in the Crimson Dragon realm, the Seven Swordsmen, who was undercover in the Dali dynasty, the same as Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm. This action of Li Yao and the Prince Regent were suspicious. Back then, they both suggested punishing the Imperial Advisor, but Emperor Li suppressed the matter, and the Imperial Advisor made concessions by resigning as the head of the Dali Academy. Moreover, when the Imperial Advisor and Yen Yuan released Yi Futian and sent him away, they had betrayed the Dali dynasty. And he had also said that he was the seventh swordsman in Dali dynasty, and only when he returned to Emperor Xia's dynasty would he be Yi Futian once again. He was the seventh swordsman at the time, so the Imperial Advisor's residence considered the relationship between master and apprentice. But now, for that matter, although Emperor Li did not blame the Imperial Advisor, the situation in the Dali dynasty had changed subtly, and there must have been a seed of doubt planted in Emperor Li's heart. Now, this was an opportunity for the Imperial Advisor of Dali to prove himself. If he killed Yi Futian, then the Imperial Advisor was still the same as he was before, below one man and above all the rest. Master, His Majesty wanted to test you, Yen Yuan said, and everyone else was silent. Of course, they were all too clear on this point. The Imperial Advisor of Dali's heart was also as clear as a mirror. Since that time, he had been cultivating at Imperial Advisor's residence and had rarely asked about any matters of Dali. Emperor Li wanted to find a pretext to get him to come out again and take control of Dali. Surely, there would no longer be any resistance then, and no one would dare to object. Naturally, this was because he valued the Imperial Advisor, but at the same time, it was also a test for him to see whether or not he was loyal to Dali dynasty. In a certain sense, he served as the Imperial Advisor with great power, and Emperor Li treated him well. Yi Futian was only a disciple. As a person of the opposing realm, there should be no hesitation, and there was no question about Emperor Li's action. However, that disciple for such a short time was the one he admired the most besides Yen Yuan. Although their positions were different, ultimately, it was difficult to make a move against him. What do you think? Asked the Imperial Advisor. Master, go, Yen Yuan said. His Majesty had already commanded them. If they did not obey, what would the Emperor think? The seventh swordsman gave up the opportunity and chose to return to Emperor Xia's realm. With his state of comprehension, seventh swordsman will understand and respect the master's choice, Mr. Nanjai also advised. The others did not speak, and Lu Chuan sighed. This time, it was all manipulated by Li Yao. Whatever happened before had a great impact on Li Yao. So, his report to Emperor Li this time was full of vitriol and bad intentions. Whatever choice they made would be the wrong one. The imperial advisor of Dali had been reluctant to get involved because if he killed Yi Futian, judging from the value that Emperor Xia placed on Yi Futian, it would leave the imperial advisor's residence with little choice. If he didn't go, it would suggest that he had a difference in opinion. Now, from Emperor Li to everyone in Dali dynasty, they were all of one mind, and he wanted the imperial advisor to go. Even the supporters of the imperial advisor had hoped that the imperial advisor could wash his name by killing Yi Futian and regain the power he once had in Dali. Under these circumstances, there was almost no other choice. Li Yao had counted on this too. "Dad?" Fei Xue called out. Her voice was a little low as she bowed her head slightly, and those eyes that were not seen were filled with tears. She knew the difficulties her father was facing about whether to go or not. However, did she wanted her father to face off with the seventh swordsman? The imperial advisor of Dali turned around. He smiled at Yen Yuan and the others. He then stroked Fei Xue's long hair, whispering, "I am the imperial advisor of Dali, and as His Majesty had commanded me, I shall fight. Will you kill him?" Fei Xue looked up slightly, facing the imperial advisor. Those from Emperor Xia's realm were escorted and protected by the great shaman. "How do you know that Dali would win the battle between Emperor Li's and Emperor Xia's realm in the Crimson Dragon realm?" The imperial advisor said with a smile. "Maybe the seventh swordsman will give us a surprise." In this battle, everyone had their stance, and he would do his best. This was his duty as the imperial advisor of Dali. "Back when we sent him to Emperor Xia's realm, I said that in the future, if we ever met again on the battlefield, I would not be merciful," Yen Yuan said. Now they would meet on the battlefield. How did he answer? Imperial advisor asked Yen Yuan because he had never mentioned this before. He said he would, Yen Yuan replied. The imperial advisor of Dali was stunned for a moment. He walked forward with a great laugh, saying, "Nanjai, you stay here to take care of Fei Xue. The others will follow me to the palace." "Yes." The disciples nodded. "Dad, I'll go with you." Fei Xue cried out. The imperial advisor glanced back at her and said softly, "Nanjai will take good care of you." As he finished, he continued to walk. Yen Yuan and the others followed closely behind. Mr. Nanjai and Fei Xue stayed, watching them as they left. Mr. Nanjai secretly sighed. This trip, whether it was a good omen or an evil one, perhaps the master already knew. As for Fei Xue, how could the master possibly take her along? If the master did that, Emperor Li would question his motive of taking his family away. Second brother, will Dad and the seventh swordsman both be okay? Fei Xue whispered in the direction of the departure of the imperial advisor. Her heart was extremely conflicted. This time meeting on the battlefield, she did not wish for either side to be hurt. But was this possible? Mr. Nanjai looked down at Fei Xue and said softly, "Fei Xue, don't worry too much." Fei Xue said nothing and could only pray in her heart. This trip, it was best there was no fighting. If they fought, the hope was for everything to end peacefully. The imperial advisor had gone to Dali Palace for permission to depart, and the news caused great shock. Everyone knew the significance of this trip was far more than just killing Yi Futian. There was much significance behind it. What had happened with the seventh swordsman at the time had a significant impact on the imperial advisor of Dali and even affected the structure of Dali dynasty. The Prince Regent had once again regained power and led the nobles of Dali to the epitome of their power in Dali dynasty. The trip of the imperial advisor of Dali could change the situation, so naturally, many were observing closely. To the imperial advisor of Dali, one step forward in the right direction meant that everything would open up. But a false step may destroy the myth of Dali henceforth. After the imperial advisor decided to depart, the third prince personally requested to lead some cultivators along to assist the imperial advisor, and the emperor agreed. In time, a large group of powerful cultivators set off toward Crimson Dragon Realm through a teleportation grand matrix. Futian, who was far away in Qianye City of the Crimson Dragon Realm, knew nothing of what had happened in Emperor Li's realm. He was still cultivating in Qianye City. Li Yao should have made some movement. In a blink of an eye, some time passed. On this day, inside a city in Crimson Dragon Realm, Li Yao looked up into the void and saw a large group coming. Their appearance gladdened Li Yao's heart, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He put his hands together and greeted those descending from the sky. Greetings to the third royal brother and the imperial advisor. His Royal Highness. The imperial advisor nodded in return. The Li Yao of today was vastly different from before. After entering the Saint Plane, he became even more unfathomable. In the past, the imperial advisor released the seventh swordsman, saying that as long as he was the seventh swordsman, none shall pursue him. But now, the seventh swordsman is Futian, who went undercover inside Dali Dynasty and stole many of our methods of cultivation, including the deed of thorough comprehension of the imperial advisor, as well as the Sword of Cassiopeia, and other books from Dali Academy. Li Yao continued, now, Futian has entered the Saint Plane and is highly valued by Emperor Xia. Even Xia Qingyuan accompanies him frequently. This man must be eliminated. Since the imperial advisor has arrived, let's head straight away to Qianye City and get rid of him. His Highness has been through the Battle of the Empty Realm, so you know that before the war, all three parties had to sacrifice to the flag, and then the three Renhuangs may begin the war. Futian and Princess Xia Qingyuan were there, as well as the Great Shaman, which was sufficient to represent Emperor Xia's realm. If we desire war, we must first declare war, replied the imperial advisor. Imperial advisor, this is an emergency, and the person spied on our Dali dynasty. How can we declare war by formal means and run the risk of them fleeing? Li Yao frowned. He instead believed that the imperial advisor wanted to allow Futian to escape. The message previously relayed by His Highness was that Emperor Xia's realm captured a city within the Crimson Dragon realm, which is to be the foundation of Emperor Xia's realm here. If so, we will also occupy a city and use it as a base to declare war against Qianye City and Futian's crime against Dali, and take him down with reason. If the people of Emperor Xia's realm flee without a fight, it would not be too late for us to chase after them and eliminate them, the imperial advisor continued. If I take someone to ambush Futian, whose plane is way below mine, our Dali princes, who were outside, might also be ambushed by top figures of Emperor Xia's realm. Li Yao looked at the imperial advisor. Although he was the prince of Dali dynasty, he had no right to command the imperial advisor. Otherwise, the situation today would not have existed. If this was really what the imperial advisor intended to do, there was nothing he could do. Even though he wanted to kill Futian, he did not have such a strong power within his grasp that would allow him to move the great shaman, so he had to use some leverage. Let's do as the imperial advisor says, the third prince said. Very well. Li Yao nodded. His voice was somewhat grim. In the Crimson Dragon realm, from the cities in the area surrounding Crimson Dragon City came the news that another city had changed hands. In the Crimson Dragon realm, from the cities in the area surrounding Crimson Dragon City came the news that another city had changed hands. The men who seized the city were cultivators from Emperor Li's realm and planned to rename the city as Li City. In a short amount of time, there were 2 consecutive seizures of cities, and both were done by Renhuang realms, which caused a lot of discussions. Moreover, many top figures had maps of the Crimson Dragon realm, and they knew that the Emperor Li's realm and Emperor Xia's realm were 2 major adjacent Renhuang realms. Then this sudden seizure of the city by Emperor Li's realm without warning. Did it have anything to do with the cultivators of Emperor Xia's realm over at Qianye City? Soon they knew the answer. After Emperor Li's realm captured the city, a messenger was sent to Qianye City. They went to the city lord's office and handed over a declaration of war. In Qianye City, when Futian received the declaration of war, there was a slight disturbance in his heart. He put down the declaration of war and stood on the steps of the stairs. He looked into the distance, sighing silently. This seemed to be different from what he had expected. Why did the person who came have to be the imperial advisor of Dali? Behind him, a figure stepped forward and stood beside him, also looking into the distance. Man plans, God laughs, Xia Qingyuan said softly. Yi Futian's goal when he first came to Crimson Dragon Realm was to gain a foothold in Crimson Dragon Realm. He asked the Crimson Dragon Emperor to borrow the teleportation Grand Matrix to cross the border to Supreme Path Realm. The Crimson Dragon Realm was the main realm of the region, and its teleportation Grand Matrix was connected to various Renwang's realms in the region. However, to cross the region to reach the higher realm was not something easily done. One must go through the Crimson Dragon Emperor. Therefore, coming to the Crimson Dragon Realm was also a trial. Before leaving, however, Yi Futian was reminded of the incident of being exposed while at Emperor Li's realm. If someone inside Emperor Xia's palace did it, then there was a chance that this trip may be exposed as well. Therefore, he asked Xia Qingyuan for help and had prepared for it. He wanted to wait for Li Yao in this Crimson Dragon Realm. As long as Li Yao took the initiative to kill him, there was a chance to get rid of him. But Yi Futian had not expected that the person sent from Emperor Li's realm would be the imperial advisor of Dali. What happened at the time caused great havoc in Dali. It ended with the imperial advisor resigning from his post at the Dali Academy. Common sense would dictate that anyone but the imperial advisor to be used to deal with him. Weren't they concerned that the imperial advisor would let him go again? But apparently, Dali did not follow this thought pattern. They planned to use the imperial advisor to deal with him. This must have been a dirty trick thought up by Li Yao. Naturally, he knew how nasty the situation was. Now, he was caught in a dilemma. This situation was not what he had hoped for. The two of them stood there silently, not speaking. Yi Futian picked up the declaration of war again and turned to the opposite side. On that side, there was a line of writing on it. Clear conscience, never fear. Xia Qingyuan turned around and glanced at it. She was now a little curious about this imperial advisor of Dali. The imperial advisor of Dali must have known that you would feel torn about this, so he wrote these 4 words. No matter how you choose, I have no preferences, Xia Qingyuan said softly. Fight or retreat, she was fine with either. Thank you very much, Yi Futian said softly. The master came in person to fulfill his obligation. We have already established a foothold in the Crimson Dragon Realm and have taken Qianya City. How can we walk away from it now? And if we walk away, can we come back again? He smiled and then sliced a corner off of his robe. With the sound of tearing, an edge of the robe came off. Xian Qingyuan focused her eyes on Yi Futian's action. Her heart was slightly disturbed. Was this a gesture to break away? Why? Yi Futian engraved a line of words on that piece of clothing. No mercy on the battlefield. When he was done, he walked forward, ready to dispatch it with a messenger to Li City and hand it to the imperial advisor. The imperial advisor would understand what he meant. Emperor Li ordered the imperial advisor to come. He must fight with all his strength and kill him. He must not show mercy. Otherwise, it would be disloyal to Emperor Li. Emperor Li must have had his own take on what had happened. If it happened again, it would be difficult to predict what would happen next. Therefore, he cut off the corner of his robe to send a message. The declaration on the robe was delivered to the imperial advisor, and this exchange caused much attention within the Crimson Dragon Realm. These 2 Renwang's realms seemed to be on the verge of starting a great war in the Crimson Dragon Realm. In this battle, who would win? However, neither side proceeded to start the war. As time passed, the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon was drawing closer. The people of all major cities had all submitted a list of those who would be participating in the battle, but this time, Qianya City did not plan to participate. On this day, Situ Yen came to the city lord's office and found Yi Futian. Situ Yen had also heard about the news of the declaration of war by Emperor Li's realm, but she did not ask. This was not under her purview. City Lord Yi, Situ Yen called out. Now that Yi Futian was named the City Lord of Qianya City, the title of City Lord Yi seemed fitting. Is there anything I can do for you? Yi Futian asked with a smile. After this battle of the Sleeping Dragon, it will be the 10th battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Do you know that after every 10th of the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, there will be a grand event for all those who have received the Rising Dragon? Sidu Yen asked Yi Futian. I do know. Yi Futian nodded. He had known this very early on. Therefore, he had insisted on Yu Sheng taking part in the battle of the sleeping dragon. It's good for you to know that this time, it will be a huge opportunity. Sidu Yen nodded. The winners of the 10th battle of the sleeping dragons who got the rising dragon order were all top figures. It could be said that they were all one step away from the saint plane, right underneath being saints. Immediately following, there would be a super showdown between the strongest. So, when Yu Sheng entered the battle, and when Situ Yen saw Kong Xian, she thought, if Yu Sheng wins the battle, what will he do when he faces Kong Xian? In the end, Yu Sheng was given the rising dragon, but Situ Yen didn't think about what would happen later. Yu Sheng was strong enough. Even if he faced other characters who had received the rising dragon, such as Kong Xian, his strength would be equal to them, and he would not be inferior. Furthermore, this face-off forbade killing. After all, they were geniuses who had obtained the rising dragon and were eligible to join the Crimson Dragon army. Well, Yi Futian nodded, and among the 10 strong men who won the rising dragon, one would be chosen, which was equivalent to picking the strongest among the countless top figures in the Crimson Dragon realm. That person would receive the Crimson Dragon Emperor's reward. They would also enter the most powerful palace of cultivation in Crimson Dragon realm, the Regional Palace, to cultivate. The Regional Palace was known as the place to train the regional kings of the realm. Many of the people who came out of it had become upper-level figures in the Crimson Dragon army, not just ordinary members. There were very few cultivators in the Regional Palace, which could be described as rare. It was similar to Dali Academy, but it was far stronger than Dali Academy. This was the gathering place of the kings of the realms created by the Crimson Dragon Emperor. From there, Renhuang were born. Renhuang of all realms were also willing to send future descendants to cultivate there. Therefore, many of those who participated in the battle of the sleeping dragon were aiming at the regional palace and wanted to seize an opportunity that could change their lives. Such a place was where Futian hoped that Yu Sheng, Wu Chen, and even the third brother could all enter to cultivate. However, among the winners of the 10th Rising Dragon, only one would be selected. Therefore, Yi Futian intended Yu Sheng to be the one who entered the regional palace. And only Yu Sheng could fight. Otherwise, the third brother and Yi Wuchen, strong as they were, could they be certain to beat the 10 who had obtained the Rising Dragon? Everyone besides Kong Xian and Kong Zhan were people he had fought before. Who else could guarantee the win other than Yu Sheng? Even for someone as strong as Xia Qingyuan, there would be pressure. If there was an accident on the battlefield, such as being ganged up on, a strike was highly likely. You asked me to find out what's going on in Li City. They will send someone to participate in the next battle of the Sleeping Dragon, and just in time for the 10th. Whoever gets the Rising Dragon will meet Yu Sheng and the others, Sidu Yen continued. A flash crossed Yi Futian's eyes as he looked at Sidu Yen. Might the battle between the two Renhuang realms begin here? Was this the will of the Imperial Advisor, or was it the will of Liao? If someone from the Dali dynasty were to join in the battle, and if neither of them was in the Saint Plain, then it would be one or both of them. At the time, the two strongest cultivators below the Saint Plain in Dali dynasty were Di Hao of Daily Mountain and Dong Chen of Dali Academy. Later, Di Hao defeated Dong Chen, and he defeated Di Hao. It was just that, had they been brought over to the Crimson Dragon realm? He heard that the third prince had arrived with the Imperial Advisor, and now it was the third prince who was in charge of Dali Academy. I know, thank you, Yi Futian said to Sidu Yen. I'll go back now, Sidu Yen said, then turned to leave. The Battle of Sleeping Dragon was here once again, and the Rising Dragon platform at Crimson Dragon City once again became the gathering place of countless cultivators. As usual, the castle was crowded with people of the peak principalities everywhere. Many of the cultivators of the Dali dynasty were there, such as the third prince and Liao. This time, the people of Dali would participate in the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. The Imperial Advisor of Dali, Yen Yuan, and the others had also arrived today. At the top of the castle, all eyes were fixed on the huge cylinder covered by the light screen. Such a cruel battle, and the style of martial arts could indeed produce a group of top characters, fanning the interests in martial arts and its success. However, such a cruel way of competition was not greatly favored by the imperial advisor of Dali, so he was little lacking in interest. Great teacher, about a month ago, the people of Emperor Xia's realm swept through the powerful men at the Rising Dragon platform, especially Yi Futian's good friend Yu Sheng, whose strength suppresses cultivators of all sides. He made a name for himself, Liao said to Yen Yuan, who was next to him. He continued, "What does the great teacher think about Di Hao and Dong Chen of Dali's chances?" "I don't know," Yen Yuan responded lightly. "You will know after the exchange," Liao said. He didn't care about Yen Yuan's cold and arrogant attitude, he was already used to it. Just opposite them, a group came quietly. Yen Yuan and others looked at them instantly and saw Yi Futian arrive with many cultivators of Emperor Xia's realm dynasty. He was accompanied by the great shaman, who was clad in the cloak. Yi Futian walked to the edge of the castle. His attention focused on the imperial advisor of Dali and Yen Yuan opposite of him. There was a smile in his eyes. When they parted in the past, they never expected to see each other this way. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The imperial advisor of Dali and Yen Yuan, likewise, looked toward Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian appeared as the seventh swordsman, and the only time Yen Yuan saw his true identity was the time when he escorted Yi Futian back to Emperor Xia's realm. The imperial advisor of Dali and Yen Yuan, likewise, looked toward Yi Futian. Previously, Yi Futian appeared as the seventh swordsman, and the only time Yen Yuan saw his true identity was the time when he escorted Yi Futian back to Emperor Xia's realm. This was the first time that the imperial advisor of Dali had seen Yi Futian's true visage, but he still recognized him at first glance. Although his temperament had changed completely, but it was still outstanding. Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm greets the imperial advisor and the great teacher. Yi Futian bowed slightly toward the imperial advisor and Yen Yuan in the opposite direction. He referred himself as Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm was a clear marking of the boundary, as he did not address them as master or brother any longer. Respect and boundary were not mutually exclusive. If they got too close, it might cause them trouble instead. He had sent the message using the fragment of his robe, and the master should understood his intention. Next to him, Xia Qingyuan also looked in the opposite direction and said, "Xia Qingyuan of Emperor Xia's realm greets the imperial advisor of Dali." The imperial advisor looked at the two and nodded with a smile. "Yi Futian, I once said that the moment you return to Emperor Xia's realm, and we meet on the battlefield, I will not be merciful, you should be careful in the future," Yen Yuan said to Yi Futian. Yi Futian smiled and nodded and replied, "And my response is still the same." On the side, Liao listened to the conversation and looking a little gloomy. Was this a complete disregard of his presence? From the moment Yi Futian arrived, he had never acknowledged him. As if he didn't exist at all. How insulting this was. "Xia Qingyuan, you have received the declaration of war?" Liao looked at Xia Qingyuan and asked. Xia Qingyuan looked coldly at Liao, and heard him continuing, "What Yi Futian did in Dali were sins beyond forgiveness. If you are willing to surrender him to us, then we will treat this whole affair as if nothing ever happened, otherwise, the consequences are yours to bear entirely." After the defeat of the Battle of the Empty Realm, someone was sent to ambush, and had infiltrated deep inside without being detected. "Liao, where did you get the courage to even open your mouth?" Xia Qingyuan continued, "I heard that you have now entered into the Saint Plane, just at the same time that Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm was also entering the divine path. Since you can't let this go, you might as well fight a battle to the death, what say you?" When Liao heard Xia Qingyuan's words, his face darkened, to fight to death against Yi Futian. Although Liao himself was also quite excellent, but to have him face off against Yi Futian in the same realm, he had no confidence of winning at all. During the battle in the Empty Realm, the battle between Yi Futian and Di Hao was a peerless match. It was rumored that before he became saint, Yi Futian had forcefully gone to the Shao clan and killed Shao Sheng, who had already entered the Saint Plane. As a peak sage, he had defeated the existence of a saint, and used that battle to enter the divine path. Such was Yi Futian, and how could he fight against that? "Li Yao, thank you for the care you've taken while I was at Dali," Yi Futian glanced at Li Yao and suddenly Li Yao's eyes were full of murderous intent. Yi Futian's words inadvertently poked at his wound. Just wait and see. Li Yao looked down at the rising dragon platform. Yi Futian took out a storage ring, which contained the treasures and sacred spirit stones that he had earned in the last battle of the sleeping dragon. He turned around and looked behind him, and smiled at Situ Yen, saying, "How about doing me a favor?" "Go ahead," Situ Yen said. "Put it all on Di Hao," Yi Futian smiled. "You can also make some adjustments, but don't go to the extremes. I don't have absolute confidence this time either and can only say that the chances are good, about 50%. "All right," Situ Yen nodded. They had missed an opportunity last time. This time, she believed in Yi Futian. Di Hao's strength was acknowledged by Yi Futian. At the time at Dali Dynasty, besides him, Di Hao was truly invincible. He was the adopted son of King Tiandao, a peerless figure cultivated by Daily Mountain. After the defeat of Di Hao in that battle, and after he had cultivated for such a long period of time, presumably his realm had advanced, and he must definitely be one of the top figures below the Saint Plane. Of course, the people participated in the battle of the sleeping dragon were not weaklings themselves, and there must be stronger opponents, so he did not have absolutely assurance. But Yu Sheng had a major victory last month at the battle of the sleeping dragon, and so Dali had dispatched the likes of Di Hao and the others to combat, must be because they wanted a definitive result and would be employing their full capacity. Those who answered the call would not just be Di Hao, but also several other top figures like Dong Qin. Therefore, Yi Futian was willing to bet on this opponent. If he lost, it was only the winnings from last time. He did not put any of his own capital in and did not ask for Xia Qingyuan for a loan again. So it was just for the fun of it. Soon, the battle of the sleeping dragon would erupt, and it would be another raging battle. Di Hao, Dong Chen and the others fought for themselves, and their strength has increased compared to before. Di Hao's god-bearing bell, tripod of dragon and elephant, and the sword of Cassiopeia were all top-notch offensive techniques. When the three major life spirits sang in unison, their power of might was amazing beyond belief, and would defeat the opponents consecutively. Dong Chen summoned the Dharma body of the Vajra, many arms blasted out at the same time, and it was equally overpowering. Even on a stage such as the Battle of Sleeping Dragon, he still belonged with the top characters. After all, the two of them in Dali were also the ones who could overcome Li Yao. Furthermore, if it wasn't for the fact that both of them were defeated once, they might have already entered the divine path. Of course, entering the Saint Plane required opportunity and timing, and now that their realm was on par, they were only waiting for the right time. In addition to the two, there was a very strong cultivator that Yi Futian had seen only once before, and they had made exchanges before. It was the swordsman at Daily Mountain who had first used the sword of Cassiopeia, 7 Sins. At that time, many thought that he would be the opponent of the premier swordsman of Sword Mountain, Jian Wu, but Yi Futian had seized the weakness of Jian Wu and defeated him with a single move. Now, 7 Sins had become even stronger. At the end of the battle, showdowns were between the strongest, Di Hao, Dong Chen, 7 Sins, and others joined forces to overpower the rising dragon platform and defeated many opponents. Finally, the three were successfully ascended to heaven. Witnessing this, Li Yao expressed a look of satisfaction. This way, Di Hao and the others could face off with Yu Xing of Emperor Xiao's realm. Was Yi Futian trying to send Yu Xing into regional palace? Not so fast. They were all from the Renwang's realm, and their goal was not necessarily to join the Crimson Dragon army like the people of the Crimson Dragon realm, but if they could enter the regional palace, it was not a possibility to be refused. Kong Xian also arrived today to observe the battle. Like last month, the winner of this game would become her opponent. After 7 days, whoever is in possession of the Rising Dragon may take part in the battle of the regional palace, the Saint and the Void announced, and this couldn't be more familiar to the people in Crimson Dragon realm. The light screen disappeared. Li Yao glanced at Yi Futian and the others, then turned to move in another direction, walking toward Kong Zhan and Kong Xian. "It's been a long time since I saw the two of you after the Battle of the Empty Realm," Li Yao said. Yi Futian looked over there, understood Li Yao's intention. Did Li Yao intend to continue the Battle of the Empty Realm? At the time, in the Battle of the Empty Realm, Emperor Li's realm teamed up with the Peacock Demon Emperor's realm, but it was obstructed by him. Now, would Li Yao make another attempt? Kong Xian, Kong Zhan, Jialo Feng, coupled with Di Hao, Dong Chen, and Seven Sins from Emperor Li's realm, such combination could indeed be considered as extremely powerful and a nearly invincible team. Of course, this strong showdown was not only for them, but also for the top figures in the Crimson Dragon realm. Perhaps, their strength was not necessarily weaker than Di Hao and Dong Chen. Even Yu Xing would feel a touch of pressure in such a battlefield. Had I known, I would have participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon this time, Xia Qingyuan said when she saw Li Yao went to Kong Xian. If she and Gu Donglu had participated in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon this time around, they would have been able to suppress Di Hao and Dong Chen, and the Battle of the Regional Palace after that would have not much to do with Li Yao and the others. It is better for the princess to not get involved in these killings and fightings, Yi Futian said with a smile while Xia Qingyuan gave him a dirty look. Could one avoid fighting in the world of cultivation? Her reputation in Emperor Xia's realm was not based on her breeding. Let's go. Yi Futian glanced at the direction of the imperial advisor and Yen Yuan and slightly nodded at them, then turned to leave. His main purpose for coming was to see the imperial advisor and his party. As for the battle between the two sides, naturally it would not take place here. The Crimson Dragon City was the only city directly ruled by the Crimson Dragon Emperor. No one dared to start a war here, so a battle would start somewhere outside the city. After Yi Futian returned, the two sides remained in peace, because after 7 days, there would be a battle. This face-off would be held in the regional palace. Anyone who has received the Rising Dragon in the 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon may participate in the war, but of course, they could also abstain. In this battle, no killing was allowed, therefore no death would occur, so no one would abstain. Many top characters participate in the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon as trials, to join the Crimson Dragon army, and to exchange with other top opponents. In the end, they also wanted a chance to enter the regional palace of course. This was too difficult. There could only be one winner of the 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon, the invincible one who could overpower everyone else, may enter the regional palace to cultivate. There was a Crimson River in Crimson Dragon City. This river was a boiling river, like fire of magma. The fire of the Great Path flowed within the river. The regional palace was situated on the Crimson River. The sky around the majestic regional palace was of a reddish color, and the sky was full of red glow all day long. The entire regional palace was shrouded by the will of the Great Path. The will of the way was omnipresent and could be felt distinctively at any time. Some people said that underneath the regional palace, there was a great treasure of Renhuang, which was the cause of such a wondrous sight. Some people said that the entire regional palace was a rare treasure in itself, which was casted by the power of Renhuang, and gathered the will of the great path of heaven and earth. At this time, in the Crimson River, there was a figure standing on the regional palace and his gaze directed toward the opposite side of the Crimson River. These people had extraordinary temperament and were full of peerless beauty. Some were surrounded by the great path while others were hidden by the glory of Renhuang. When cultivating at the regional palace, one must always release power to defend against the burning will of the great path at all times. Therefore the breath of these people could be felt distinctly. Those who cultivated in the regional palace came from all the Renhuang realms of the Crimson Dragon realm. Some were from other royal family, and some were the descendants of the top figures from all walks of life who were sent here to cultivate. Regional Palace was known as the strongest place for cultivation in Crimson Dragon realm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Many people had gathered at the other end of the Crimson River. Many people had gathered at the other end of the Crimson River. Cultivators from all over the Crimson Dragon realm had come and were prepared to witness this battle between top fighters. The best cultivators from the Crimson Dragon realm always came to each battle of the Sleeping Dragon, but only a few of them could receive the title of Rising Dragon. However, today, 10 cultivators who had received this title were there and had chosen to send forth the strongest among them. It was evident that this was going to be a special match. Even though there was no betting on this match and no one would die, it still drew much more attention than the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon. Everyone was looking straight ahead. The regional palace was there. It was the place that countless cultivators yearned for. The regional palace seemed to be covered by the red clouds that filled the sky like blood. To go there was everyone's dream. From where they were, they could faintly make out figures atop the regional palace. It seemed that they were interested in the battle as well. After this battle, another person would enter the regional palace and cultivate with them. At that moment, a group of figures walked up. There was suddenly a hubbub, and everyone's gaze turned to there. They saw the powerful figures walking towards the Crimson River. The cultivators from Xiang City have arrived, everyone thought. Xiang City was absolutely among the best of the cities around Crimson Dragon City. Just like Qinya City and Demon Peacock City, Xiang City had also been founded by one of Renwang's realms in the Crimson Dragon realm. But its history was much longer. Emperor Xiang's realm had made an arrangement with the Crimson Dragon's realm many years ago. Now they sent out their forces from within the Crimson Dragon's realm. They were extremely powerful. Emperor Xiang always sent his descendants to the Crimson Dragon realm to train. The person who had come from Xiang City to take part in this battle at the regional palace was one of Emperor Xiang's sons, Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan was extraordinarily talented and had great combat ability. In the battle of the Sleeping Dragon that he had taken part in, he had used his incredible strength to sweep away all other cultivators. He had dominated the battlefield. The Sleeping Dragon had risen into the sky, and Xiang Nan had been entitled as a rising dragon. Everyone sized him up. Although he looked refined and cultivated, and there was a well-educated look to his face. Those who had witnessed the battle of the Sleeping Dragon knew that under his harmless appearance, there was a wild fighting spirit. If Xiang Nan's face deceived you, you would die a miserable death. Xian Nan was, without a doubt, one of the favorites to win this battle of selection. Before Yu Sheng appeared, he would have been in the top 3. But now, many people did not dare to rank him so highly. It was not that Xiang Nan wasn't powerful, it was just that many others were not inferior to him in any way. Xiang Nan stepped forward, and everyone subconsciously made a path for him, letting him walk to the bank of the Crimson River and look out over the water. "It seems that we got here pretty early," said Xiang Nan with a warm smile. He was looking at the regional palace before him. His eyes were sharp and domineering. Today, most of the conversations in Crimson Dragon City and the surrounding cities were about the conflict between Emperor Li's realm and Emperor Xia's realm, and the conflict between Li City and Qinya City. It seemed that these conflicts had been brought to this battle at the regional palace. It looked like this would be their battlefield. How ridiculous! He had gone to see the battle several days ago. Di Hao and Dong Chen were incredibly strong and graceful, but could they beat him? If someone dared to say this, he would call them a fool. At this battle before the regional palace, there was only one opponent for him, the one from the ancient imperial city. There was another hubbub as other cultivators started to arrive. The cultivators from the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm arrived, led by Kong Xian and Kong Zhan, and they came to the bank of the Crimson River. At this battle, even those as strong as Kong Xian and Kong Zhan were not assured a victory. All they could say was that they would try their hardest to win. The people of the Dali dynasty arrived as well, led by the 3 princes. Di Hao, Dong Chen, and 7 Sins were all there. Li Yao searched all around with his eyes. It seemed like he was looking for someone. After a while, Li Yao looked up into the sky. There, he saw a group of figures descending. Suddenly, everyone all around made a place for them and watched them as they approached. Yu Xing had arrived. This was someone who had previously been unknown, but after the battle of the Sleeping Dragon, his name shook the 4 corners of the earth. Yu Sheng of Emperor Xia's realm was incredibly powerful. He had swept away all the other cultivators at the battle of the Sleeping Dragon. With his terrible power, he had even thrown the demon Saint Crimson Dragon. It had been a truly frightening display of power. A monster like that would certainly show up at this battle. Yi Futian appeared as well and glanced over at Li Yao. Was he going to try and have Di Hao and Dong Chen try to stop Yu Sheng? Was that even possible? Di Hao and Dong Chen may have been strong, but they probably could not stand up to Yu Sheng in his current power. The cultivators from the ancient imperial city have arrived. At that moment, a clamor rose from the crowd. Everyone looked off into the distance. Whoever was coming was even more worthy of their attention than Prince Xiangnan had been. When he heard this, Yi Futian also looked off into the distance, where he saw the ones who were coming. The youth in the front appeared to be even younger than he was. His golden robes were shining brightly, and they were very flashy and beautiful. This was Xingqiu of the ancient imperial city. The reason that Yi Futian paid attention to the ancient imperial city was that it was very legendary, having the word imperial in its name. The ruler of the city was not an emperor and had not been founded by another Renhuang. But it still had the word imperial in its name. That was an incredibly arrogant thing to do. The reason the ancient imperial city was legendary was that it only had one great power in it. This force ruled the city, and no one dared to object. The ruler of the ancient imperial city was a legendary figure himself. He called himself Ninth Servant, which seemed like the name of an inferior person. But in reality, Ninth Servant was looked at by many people as the foremost city lord in the Crimson Dragon realm, and the strongest of all the lords. Some said that he had already made it through the Saint Plane and was one step away from the Renhuang level. Ninth Servant was but a step away from the Renhuang Plane. With such a glorious reputation, there was no doubt that he was an extremely powerful figure. It was rumored that Ninth Servant had been a vassal of Emperor Zhan of Emperor Zhan's realm. After Emperor Zhan fell, his realm was occupied, and so Ninth Servant escaped with Emperor Zhan's descendants and brought them to the Crimson Dragon realm. The city that they occupied was named the Ancient Imperial City. And Xingqiu of the Ancient Imperial City was one of the powerful figures taking part in the battle before the regional palace. Even after Yu Xing had revealed his incredible combat ability, Xingqiu was still ranked above him. This showed how legendary the ancient imperial city was and how powerful Xingqiu was. Yu Xing had thrown a demon dragon at the battle of the sleeping dragon. Everyone had seen it. The cultivators of the Crimson Dragon's realm were not stupid. But even so, they still thought that Xingqiu would be the one to enter the regional palace. So this Xingqiu must be even stronger than Yi Futian had thought. He could even shake saint-level figures. Kong Xian and Kong Zhan looked at Xingqiu as well. They knew that he was their most powerful opponent besides Yu Sheng. No one at this battle of the regional palace could say that they were assured of victory. There were so many powerful opponents and no weak ones. Who would make this battle their stage? At that moment, a group of powerful cultivators descended from the sky. They wore red robes embroidered with dragon patterns, making them look like imperial robes. This was the symbol of the Crimson Dragon army. They alighted on the bank of the Crimson River. Something seemed to be initiated as they arrived, as there was a burst of power that descended from the sky. The power was nearly divine and suppressed everyone's spirits and will. A heavenly mirror appeared up in the red sky, shining with brilliant morning light upon the Crimson River. The light of the great path fell upon them all, and upon the river, illuminating the battlefield. The light was shining directly upon everyone's battlefield. "Is this battle going to take place under the might of the great path?" whispered Yi Futian as he felt the power of the mirror. He looked at Su Ke and Qin Zhuang behind him and said, "If you're not going to fight, you should forfeit now." With a battle at this level, even though they wouldn't die, there was no point in participating if they weren't strong enough. "I won't fight," said Su Ke with a nod. He had not yet been enlightened, so there was indeed no point in him fighting. Anyone on the battlefield would have been able to crush him. "I want to feel what it's like," said Huang Jioge. He knew that since he had not been enlightened either, he was not strong enough, but he still wanted to try. He was only a step away. This battle would be another chance for him. "I want to try too," said Qin Zhuang. Yi Wuchen looked out over the Crimson River with a solemn expression. He would naturally fight. An opportunity like this was rare, indeed. Those who won the title of Rising Dragon in the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon may come, said the cultivator in the air above the Crimson River. A group of cultivators stepped forward, advancing onto the battlefield. The victors of the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon arrived one by one. Everyone felt their blood boiling in anticipation as they watched those figures before the fight. What kind of contest would this be? There were top figures like Xingqiu of the ancient imperial city, Xiangnan, the prince of Xiang City, Yu Sheng, who had thrown a giant demon dragon, Kong Xian and Kong Zhan of the demon peacock emperor's realm, who possessed the nine-color divine light, Di Hao and Dong Chun of Emperor Li's realm, and others. How could a contest like this not excite people? Far off in the direction of the regional palace, several figures rose into the air. They crossed the Crimson River and stopped just outside the battlefield. It seemed that they had come to watch the battle. Everyone gave a sharp cry when they saw who one of them was. Xing Kai. Xing Kai of the ancient imperial city was a hero of the Crimson Dragon realm. When he had fought at the Battle of the Regional Palace, he had swept away all his opponents. He had been unopposed. After becoming a saint, he had remained undefeated. It was said that even after entering the regional palace he had swept away all opponents there who were on the same plane as him. There was so much glory about him. He was truly a legend of his generation. And he was Xing Chao's elder brother. He had personally come from the regional palace to witness the battle at the Crimson River. He was waiting for his brother Xing Qiu to sweep away all his opponents, just like he had, using his once-in-a-generation strength to cross the Crimson River and enter the regional palace to cultivate. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The Crimson River flowed like a stream of magma, dyeing the world red. The Crimson River flowed like a stream of magma, dyeing the world red. Light shone from the heavenly mirror in the sky, illuminating the space for the battle of the Great Path. There were more than 30 people on the battlefield at that moment. In total, there were over 30 people who had achieved the title of Rising Dragon in the last 10 battles of the Sleeping Dragon, an average of about 3 people for each battle. But many of them were merely secondary characters. In most people's eyes, only a few people were participating in this battle at the Crimson River. Is Xing Qiu like his brother? Can he use his unmatched strength to sweep away all others on the battlefield and enter the regional palace to stand shoulder to shoulder with his brother Xing Kai? Everyone watched in solemn silence. They had high hopes for Xing Qiu of the ancient imperial city. Could Xiangnan, the prince of Emperor Xiang's realm, Kong Xian and Kong Chan, the descendants of the demon peacock emperor, and the incomparably overbearing Yu Sheng threaten Xing Qiu? But before this, Yu Sheng and the others from Qianya City would probably have to come into conflict with those from Emperor Li's realm. And they were also compelling figures. "Begin," said the head of the Crimson Dragon army, up in the sky. He had not stated the rules for this battle. Nothing was forbidden in this battle, save for killing your opponents and relying on outside help. The last person left on the battlefield would be the winner. There were no other rules. You could fight as you pleased. They only cared about the ending. The strongest one among them would be rewarded by the Crimson Dragon Emperor and would enter the regional palace to cultivate. Powerful auras swept out all over the battlefield. Everyone stood there solemnly and did not move. Just the burning air coming off the Crimson River and the majesty of the Great Path descending from the sky were suffocating enough to make them release their power to resist them. With a long cry, Jialo Feng rose into the air. Everyone looked up at him and saw a brilliant golden light shining from him. A divine golden rock appeared around his body. Jialo Feng of the Jialo royal family's true body was that of a golden rock. The brilliant light of the Great Path flowed across the rock's divine wings. He narrowed his eyes proudly and swept them over Yu Sheng and the others. At the Battle of Empty Realm, he had not only been defeated by Yi Futian, he had dominated him. He had been utterly humiliated. But he was of the Jialo royal family. So, a bolt of golden lightning pierced through the air with great speed. In a flash, the rock's feathers shot out, sharper than any sword, cutting through the air as they sped towards Yu Sheng. Boom! There was the sound of a mighty footstep as dark golden light flowed and blazed. The wind whistled as Yu Sheng raised his fist, slamming it into the sky, making even Jialo Feng's mighty form tremble a bit. The wild fist tore through the air and collided violently with the onrushing feathers. There was an ear-piercing grating noise that filled heaven and earth as Yusheng's fist was scratched by the feathers, but they could not cut through it, and some of them were even slammed to the ground. Jialo Feng was sent flying backward. Such power! Everyone felt their hearts tremble. Yusheng of Qianye City seemed to have the strength of a god. He was not inferior in the least to those who had the blood of Renhuang and was possibly even superior to them. Could it be that he was the descendant of some powerful figure of Emperor Xia's realm? "You are no opponent for him, Jialo," came a voice. Kong Xian stepped forward with her peacock feathers spread out, covering the sky. Divine light shone from her. When she spread her feathers, they seemed to contain the power of the Great Path and the ability to suppress heaven and earth. She could naturally see how strong and talented Yusheng was. He was a natural-born warrior. At the Battle of the Sleeping Dragon, he had thrown a demon saint, and from this, his power was undeniable. He was indeed a madman when it came to battle. Even though Jialo Feng's attack power was peerless, he was still at a disadvantage when faced with such resistance. This showed how strong Yusheng was. Kong Xian stepped forward and descended to the ground where Yusheng was. Her divine light flashed brilliantly as it fell from the sky. At that moment, 9-colored light covered Yusheng, and her beautiful figure became even more so until it was almost suffocating. Unfortunately, Yusheng did not know how to appreciate it, and he looked indifferent. Everyone who was watching looked on in wonder. This princess of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm had truly inherited the beauty of a peacock. But under this beautiful exterior was a terribly threatening aura. The 9-color light fell from the sky, and each beam of light carried with it the majesty of the Great Path. The light struck out towards Yusheng, seeking to destroy that entire space completely. Everyone trembled. The first fight would be between such strong opponents? Kong Xian of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm and Yusheng were both some of the most highly ranked fighters at today's Battle of the Crimson River. At the very least, they were both in the top 10 and possibly even the top 5. And these two people had clashed as soon as the battle started. This would be a mighty contest indeed. Yusheng felt the pressure of the Great Path upon him. The 9-color light was shooting towards him faster than lightning and carried with it the power to suppress, destroy, kill, and rend him apart. The power of the demonic path was integrated within it, giving it the ability to destroy anything. He stepped up into the air, dark golden light flowing all over him. He glittered with golden light as he was covered in a layer of sacred armor. Yusheng clenched his fists and descended upon Kong Xian. As he stepped out, the divine light slammed into him, causing a horrible booming sound that shook him. It burst upon his body, forcing him to take a step backward. But his powerful body seemed able to withstand the power of the Great Path. His every step brought him a little closer forward. The ground shook, and the Great Path thundered as a terrible pressure appeared around him. It seemed like it was trying to crush everything around him on the earth and in the sky. Boom, boom, boom. The brilliant divine light seemed to be endless as it slammed against him wildly. Each strike made everyone watching tremble. It was too wild. This kind of attack still could not break his flesh. Other than Yusheng, there was probably no one on the battlefield who would dare to bear the attacks of Kong Xian's 9-colored light on their bare flesh. How had he tempered his body to be so strong? Did he have this dark power, this demonic aura, because he had studied the demonic arts and tempered his body with them? Kong Xian trembled inwardly as well. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes, her long hair flowing in the wind. She was confident that her attacks were at the limit of what was possible at this level, but they were not able to break Yusheng's flesh. Boom! He took another step. Yusheng was continuing forward, coming closer and closer to her. His cadence harmonized with the Great Path, making her feel a suffocating pressure as she stood up in the sky. Her body felt heavy. Finally, Yusheng took a mighty stride and crossed through the air. He would be right in front of her in a moment. Kong Xian moved as well. The 9-colored light flowed over her slender arms, and she clenched her fists. Her hands were suddenly wrapped in the 9-colored light, the flowing bright glow of the Great Path. Her figure flashed like a lightning bolt, crossing through the sky and descending right in front of Yusheng. She struck him with her fists at the same time as the 9-colored light lashed continuously as him. She was also incredibly skilled at close combat. In a flash, countless fist shadows struck out in harmony with the nine-colored light. It was like every beam of the nine-colored light had transformed into a fist. Yuxing gave a great cry and thrust his fists into the air, slamming them into the great path. In a flash, there was a loud rumbling sound that pierced the sky. The air trembled as he faced Kong Xian head-on. At that moment, Yu Heng pulled back his arms, and many illusory arms appeared. Finally, a fist cut through the air and collided with Kong Xian's fists. In a flash, many fist wills overlapped, and the nine-colored light shattered violently. Kong Xian was sent flying backward. Kong Xian has been beaten back. Everyone's hearts were racing. 2 months ago, the divine and powerful demon princess had swept away everyone else on the rising dragon platform, so brilliant that she seemed peerless. But here at the Battle of the Crimson River, she had been beaten back. The Battle of the Crimson River was truly worthy of being called a battle of top figures. Yuxing did not stop his attacks. He did not believe in going easy on women, and so he stepped forward again. The great path resonated with his steps as the air around him was pressed down. He struck out with a fist as he continued forward, and fist will overlapped over more fist wills, extending his reach ever more. His power was without match, especially his Huangting fist will, which had his natural power and the power of the demonic arts integrated into it. Watch out! Kong Zhan stepped forward towards Kong Xian. Jialo Feng flashed over at the same time, and both of them attacked Yuxing, the power of their blows falling on him at the same time. Yuxing stepped up into the air and struck out with a fist. Everything in its path was destroyed as it pierced through the sky. Kong Xian blocked it with her fists of nine-colored light, but her defenses were pierced, and she was sent flying backward yet again. There were traces of blood around her mouth. But she just wiped the blood off. She floated in the air. Her peacock feathers opened up again, looking even more beautiful than before. A bit of sovereign light flowed over them, making them incomparably bright. The great path was within her. Higher up, Kong Zhan released his powerful aura. He and Kong Xian stared at Yuxing. This Yuxing of Qinya City's combat ability was greater than they had imagined. The light from the golden rock was dazzling. Jialo Feng was getting ready to rejoin the battle. The 3 top cultivators of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm were about to join together to fight Yuxing. At the same time, battles were breaking out in other directions. In one place, the 3 great cultivators of Emperor Li's realm, Di Hao, Dong Chen, and Seven Sins were walking towards 3 people from Emperor Xia's realm: Yi Wuchen, Huang Jioge, and Qin Zhuang. A bell sounded, shaking everyone's spiritual will. The 3 spirits, bell, cauldron, and sword, appeared behind him. A tall and mighty Vajra body appeared behind Dong Chen, with many arms. It was covered in divine light like a spell of invincibility. Sword will wrapped around Seven Sins' body, resonating sharply with each other. Many swords of Kasaipa were formed. Yi Wuchen faced Di Hao, Huang Jioge faced Dong Chen, Qin Zhuang faced Seven Sins. Swords of Kasaipa were forming around him as well. This made Seven Sins look very angry. And Li Yao, who was watching from the banks of the Crimson River, looked even more gloomy. He had personally given the sword of Kasaipa to Yi Futian. Now he had taken it back to Emperor Xia's realm and had apparently already taught the knowledge to many people. Qin Zhuang had learned how to form swords of Kasaipa. Yi Futian was not thinking about how Li Yao felt. He was watching the battlefield. It seemed that this truly was a continuation of the Battle of Empty Realm. In yet another battle between the realms of the 3 emperors, Emperor Xia's realm was once again facing an attack from 2 realms. This battle was an important test for Wuchen, Jioge, and Qin Zhuang. The pressure on them was great, but they could not be killed in the Battle of the Crimson River, so he was not worried. Winning or losing would test their states of mind, but he believed that Wuchen and the others, who had come up from the lower world step by step, could all withstand such a test. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Di Hao stepped towards Yi Wuchen, his god-bearing bell shaking everyone to their core. Yi Wuchen felt his mind come under serious attack. His swordsmen will trembled. Di Hao stepped towards Yi Wuchen, his god-burying bell shaking everyone to their core. Yi Wuchen felt his mind come under serious attack. His swordsmen will trembled. A sword clashed and shrieked in his mind, looking bright and resplendent. But the sword shook under the toll of the bell. The god-burying bell wanted to destroy the sword and tear it completely apart. A beam of brilliant light was melded into the sword, protecting it. The terrible sword will shot out of his eyes, piercing into the eyes of Di Hao, who was still walking towards him. Yi Wuchen's sword spirit was a spirit elemental. The sword had tempered his willpower. It was firm and unshakable. And his swordsman's will was extremely stable. The swordsman's state of mind was unblemished. His will could not be destroyed. But even so, the god-bearing bell was still difficult to bear. But he still took a step forward, single-minded, his sword will moving with him. The world between him and Di Hao turned into a world of illusory swords. There were swords everywhere. Di Hao swept his gaze over the illusory swords, looking indifferent. The bell still rang, and he knew what was an illusion and what was real. At the same time as that, the precious cauldrons flew over. They were engraved with a pattern like a mighty dragon that had been to be extraordinary. Endless precious cauldrons descended, slamming towards Yi Wuchen, trying to break everything around him. Seventh swordsman was not there, and so Di Hao was the foremost person in the Dali dynasty below the saint level. His power was clear for all to see, and his knowledge of the great path seemed infinitesimally close to that of a saint. He traversed a great distance with a single step. Yi Wuchen felt like he was under thousands of pounds of pressure, but he still held his back up straight, like the edge of a sword. He formed a sword mudra in front of him, and instantly, thousands of swords were floating in the air and whirling around his body, pointing up into the air. The endless swords formed a sword matrix, and they howled as they surrounded Yi Wuchen. One after another, the swords slashed through the air up into the sky, thundering towards the falling precious cauldrons. There was the sound of a shocking collision above Yi Wuchen. The precious cauldrons rotated as they fell, seeking to crush everything below them. But Yi Wuchen's swordsmanship swallowed them up, trying to destroy the power of the great path within them. An even more powerful sword will wrapped around Yi Wuchen. He was covered in swords. The thing was, when practicing swordsmanship, more swords did not necessarily make you more powerful. It was all in how powerful the swords were. I will use my sword for the path. Yi Wuchen looked very solemn. He closed his eyes and traced a seal in front of him. Divine light bloomed from him, and threads of will went flying towards his swords and melded into them. Suddenly, Yi Wuchen's body became indistinct. It was as if he was not real. Threads of sword will flowed from him. He seemed to become a part of all the swords. Each sword appeared in his mind. They were like his hands and feet. They were now a part of his body. When a sword bore the will of heaven and earth, it could cut through the air. Block! A sword cut through the air, slamming into a falling precious cauldron. The dragon-patterned cauldron resonated wildly but kept falling. Block! After that, another sword came. The sound of collisions rang out incessantly as sword after sword collided with the falling dragon-patterned cauldrons. Each time a cauldron fell into the sword-filled air below, cracks appeared in it. There was a loud noise. It was as if the air itself were splitting apart. All the precious cauldrons were shattered. They had been destroyed in an instant. Di Hao stared at Yi Wuchen. At that moment, the indistinct Yi Wuchen was like a statue, standing there without moving. He seemed to have become a sword of the great path himself. He knew that, at this moment, Yi Wuchen had almost no defensive power. If he could break through his swords, it would go badly for him. Di Hao stepped forward through the air, towards the space above Yi Wuchen's head. His precious cauldron life spirit howled as it descended upon Yi Wuchen's head. It constantly grew bigger as it fell until it became a divine cauldron that blocked out the sun. The power of the great path was within it. The radiance of the great path descended from above the cauldron, powerful enough to destroy anything. Countless illusory precious cauldrons fell behind it. The whole area became a death trap. The swords rattled. It seemed that they were being crushed and could not move. But the clattering swords continued to rotate, breaking up and counterbalancing the will of the precious cauldrons, and tearing through the air. They rose and shattered the illusions of precious cauldrons and shot towards Di Hao's precious cauldron life spirit. But just as they reached it, the precious cauldron just shook and sped up to suppress it. Yi Wuchen drew another seal in the air, and thousands of sword wills rose, slamming wildly into the dragon-patterned cauldron, slowing its descent. The two forces clashed wildly. Up in the sky, Di Hao's sword spirit clattered and shrieked. The matter around him coalesced into swords of Kasaipa. The swords of Kasaipa that had just formed shot towards Yi Wuchen, aiming for the finger he was using to draw seals. The swords shot through the air, seeming to ignore the vast distance between them. Yi Wuchen seemed to sense this, and his swords suddenly lined up in front of him, protecting his flesh. They shot out in all directions, colliding with the swords of Kasaipa that were flying towards him. The swords cracked and shattered each other. Di Hao stepped forward, and the ringing of his bell shook the sky. Swords of Kasaipa continued to form and shoot, being created as quickly as they were destroyed. "How many swords do you have?" Di Hao's voice melded with the ringing of the bell of the great path, thundering downward. Under the assault of 3 different powers, Yi Wuchen was subject to an immense amount of pressure. A line of scarlet blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. But he made no sound. He still stood there with his eyes closed. Not many people at the edge of the Crimson River were watching Yi Wuchen's battle. Most of them were watching others, such as Yu Sheng fighting off the 3 great cultivators of the Demon Peacock Emperor's realm by himself. Their collisions shook the air. Every attack contained unimaginable power. It was truly astonishing. But Yi Futian was paying more attention to Yi Wuchen's battle. This was not the battle of the sleeping dragon. Yu Sheng. There would be no use in Yu Sheng helping Yi Wuchen and the others. They had insisted on taking part in this battle. They had wanted to experience this kind of fighting. If Yu Sheng came and helped them, what good would it do them? Di Hao's 3 life spirits had all appeared. He was so close to the Great Path and was using his full power to attack. Wuchen would improve a lot from this, even though he was under so much pressure. And it was not only Yi Wuchen. At that moment, Huang Jioge was being crushed by Dong Chen. Dong Chen's Vajra body was tall and mighty, like a divine Vajra. Its many arms were striking out with many palm prints, crushing everything in their path. Huang Jioge's life spirit bloomed. His Renhuang body was tall and imperial, but unfortunately, it only had the form of a Renhuang, not the power. But even so, it held a sword pointed at the sky, cutting through the oncoming palm prints. This lasted until the powerful pressure from the palm prints reached him, and it crushed him to the ground, making it difficult to move. His arms trembled slightly. Dong Chen did not give him a chance to fight back. After he had crushed him, thousands of illusions shrieked forward and descended upon Huang Jioge. Many shadows overlapped into one. He struck down with one finger towards Huang Jioge's face. Dong Chen's most powerful attack was God Destroyer. This descending finger contained the attack power of the Great Path and could destroy men, gods, and ghosts. Huang Jioge stared up at Dong Chen and gave a great cry. Renhuang light flowed from him, and an incomparably overbearing power swept out, slamming into Dong Chen. But it did not stop his finger. The finger descended, and a terrible strangling force rushed towards Huang Jioge. It raged in his mind, destroying everything. At that moment, blood was running down Huang Jioge's brow. His eyes were closed, and his Renhuang will was protecting his spiritual will. But Dong Chen's finger continued to assault his spiritual willpower. "You still won't admit defeat?" called Dong Chen. The voice shook Huang Jioge's mind. In Huang Jioge's mind, his spiritual will was constantly bursting and evaporating. Lines of brilliant divine light were flowing, taking him back many years. At the Battle of the Imperial Mausoleum, his father had died protecting the tomb. He had traded his life to allow Huang Jioge to enter the tomb and inherit the power of his ancestors. He had inherited the power of the Great Path, and his ancestors had used Renhuang will to cleanse his spiritual willpower and grant the power to him. So why had he still not reached enlightenment? He had dishonored his father's death and his ancestors. Blood kept running down his brow, but the light still shone brilliantly. Huang Jioge had not given up. Yi Futian was uneasy as he beheld this scene. He had nothing to say. After the battle at the Imperial Mausoleum, Huang Jioge's personality had changed. He was no longer as bold and generous as before, but had become more restrained and silent. In that battle, Huang Shi had traded his life so that his son could inherit the will of their ancestors. Huang Jioge was presumably carrying a heavy burden. In this way, Wuchen was much more free than Jioge. His sword was simple and unblemished. He hoped that Huang Jioge could break through one day. Images flashed in Huang Jioge's mind. He seemed to be able to see the scene of him inheriting his ancestors' power. His ancestors had had the power of Renhuang. Their chariots had thundered across the world, and everyone bowed to them. Wherever they pointed their sword, the heavens paled. With long sword and longbow, they had raged against destiny and the power of the gods. How magnificent it had been! But now, even though he had inherited his ancestors' power, he was being crushed. And he had still not reached enlightenment. The world was in turmoil, and the Renhuang will within him was vast. It spread throughout heaven and earth, and a suffocating force filled the area. It seemed that Renhuang had truly arrived. Huang Jioge squeezed his eyes shut even tighter. He seemed to have forgotten that he was under attack. All that he could see was that magnificent scene. He forgot about rule power. He forgot about the great path. He just used all his might to try and feel the images before him. Before his father had died, he had used the power of his ancestor Renhuang to step upon the great path. Had he seen the magnificent things Huang Jioge was now seeing? Dong Qin frowned. He suddenly felt immense pressure. It was everywhere, like the power of Renhuang was there. It seemed that this area could not contain any other paths. Huang Jioge's Renhuang body seemed to become larger and mightier. A burst of power came from within him, making Dong Chen's Vajra body come under enormous pressure. At that moment, Huang Jioge opened his eyes. They seemed to have changed, becoming more imperious. As he looked at him, Dong Chen felt only that he should bow and submit. A wild aura swept out. Terrifying illusions appeared, a battle matrix that crushed heaven and earth, surging forth and slamming violently into Dong Chen. He felt his will was being dominated. This was the path of Renhuang. Dong Chen could naturally see the blood of Renhuang flowing upon the body of the one he was fighting, even though he had never attained enlightenment. But now, he could feel the power of the path of Renhuang. It was said that when a cultivator reached the Renhuang plane, they became pure Tao. Tao had given birth to the sky, the earth, and all things. It was as grand as heaven and earth, as brilliant as the sun and moon, and as magical as all creation. It was said that when a cultivator reached the Renhuang plane, they became pure Tao. Tao had given birth to the sky, the earth, and all things. It was as grand as heaven and earth, as brilliant as the sun and moon, and as magical as all creation. After Renhuang had become pure Tao, he had integrated it into his blood, into his life spirit, and into the magical power of creation. He preached about the Tao, and his descendants continued to become stronger through enlightenment. How much they could ultimately bear depended on their qualifications, experience, power of understanding, and tenacity. Some people were born with this talent, and some acquired it after birth. One's family background determined one's initial conditions, but when cultivating on the great path, you had to rely on yourself. As for which was more important, everyone had their own opinion. At that moment, Huang Jioge finally knew why he had never been able to achieve enlightenment. It was because the Tao that he had perceived was different than that which had been passed down by his ancestors. He thought he would learn the ways of suppression and power because these were the rule powers that he had cultivated. But today, he realized that the Tao that his ancestor Renhuang had passed down was different. It could shake the world and suppress both gods and demons. The Tao that his ancestors had passed down was the Tao of an overlord. It could suppress the entire world and threaten even immortals and demons. Without the inheritance of his ancestors, he would not have been able to comprehend this kind of will. It was now possible for him to understand the path of suppression and the path of power. Tao needed to be in harmony with heaven. He had inherited the hegemonic will of his ancestors but had always been focused on the power of repression and strength. Thus he had never been able to step onto the path. That was until now, when he had forgotten about rule power and forgotten his own Tao. His mind was filled with nothing else but the Renhuang will of his ancestors, and it finally merged with his own will. Boom! There was another footstep, and a violent airflow swept out, throwing Dong Qin back. At the same time, Huang Jioga's Renhuang sword slashed out. There was a loud noise as the Vajra body was thrown back as well. Huang Jioga's temperament suddenly changed as well. His eyes became domineering and will flowed around him, turning into martial phantoms. The illusions were so clear that they seemed real. Chariots surged around him, crushing everything beneath them. His Renhuang body grew taller and mightier, and hegemonic will swept out from the Renhuang sword as he stepped forward, pressing down on Dong Qin. It seemed that everything in the area would submit to him. His hegemonic will was like suppression, like power, and like destruction, but most of all, it was like strength. It contained the characteristics of the Great Path, and could even suppress the Tao within others. Thus, Dong Qin felt his will being dominated. This was hegemonic will. As his will was activated, Huang Jioga felt his life spirit changing. This was still not him truly becoming a saint. When he did truly become a saint, his talents would probably change once again to absorb more of the power that he had inherited from his ancestors. The blood surged through his veins. As he stepped forward, Dong Qin could feel the pressure growing stronger. He struck out, and suddenly, the Vajra body's many arms struck out as well. The air trembled as they swept through it. Huang Jioga gave a great roar as he continued forward, and an incomparably violent airflow swept out from him. All the air around him turned into a true battlefield as chariots surged and thundered forward towards where Huang Jioga pointed with the Renhuang sword. A scene of absolute destruction appeared as thousands of chariots and soldiers charged towards Dong Qin. At that moment, many people were watching Huang Jioga. The changes that had happened to him had naturally attracted a lot of attention. Watching this scene, Futian was naturally happy for Huang Jioga. Had he finally achieved enlightenment? They were different now than when they had been in the 9 states. The people of the 9 states had limited talent. After cultivating for many years, many of the top figures had the right states of mind, but they could not comprehend the Tao, and thus could not become saints. They had to borrow power to break through their limits by participating in the battle of proving holiness and using the opportunity provided by Emperor Xia. But cultivators like them needed to continue in a more steady fashion, advancing towards the understanding of their own Tao step by step. Only when the Great Path was stable could they advance farther along it. This was a big change for Huang Jioga. He was now much closer to becoming a saint. Many other battles were breaking out across the battlefield besides those of Yu Sheng and Yi Wuchen. Previously, Xing Chou and Xiang Nen had not even started fighting yet, just letting their assistants join the battle, and only getting involved when they were defeated. Now, Xiang Nen clenched his fists, and suddenly, a godlike figure blasted down from the sky, smashing into one of his opponents. He turned and looked towards Huang Jioga. He was someone who was a pure-blooded descendant of Renhuang. As a son of Emperor Xiang, he naturally knew the strength of the bloodline of Renhuang. Those at the Renhuang level were so powerful that when they cast a spell, even their descendants would be affected by it. This battle of the Crimson River was getting more and more interesting. Compared to Huang Jioga, who was transforming on the battlefield, Yi Wuchen seemed to be in great danger at this moment. Di Hao, the foremost figure below the saint level in the Dali dynasty, was attacking him wildly. Drums and bells rang as he attacked with his endless swords of Kasaipa. Yi Wuchen was currently fighting at the limits of his power. He had integrated every bit of sword will into his own willpower, and was wielding them to their fullest extent. But he was still in danger. It was just like Di Hao had asked. How many swords did he have? His sword chi might be limitless, but how much spiritual energy had Yi Wuchen put into his swords, and would he have enough time? The swords of Kasaipa wrapped around Yi Wuchen, striking at him again and again, cutting holes in the swords that surrounded Yi Wuchen. At the same time, the dragon pattern cauldron was pressing down bit by bit, seeking to shatter the sword curtain that covered Yi Wuchen and crush the swords below it. Blood ran down from the corner of his mouth and stained his robes. But he still persisted. Swords materialized constantly and were integrated into his will. They struck out towards the dragon-patterned cauldron and towards the swords of Kasaipa. One sword after another. Though they became slower, he still kept creating them. His head seemed like it was about to burst. Even with the blessing of the Renhuang sword will, he still seemed like he was past his limits. But wasn't cultivation all about breaking through your limits? He knew that he was one of the weakest people here at the Battle of the Crimson River. Most of the people here were stronger than him, and many of them were a lot stronger than him. But he had still come. He wanted this to be a turning point for him. His goal was very clear. He wanted to get a step closer to the divine path. Since he did not have enough talent, his only option was to seize any chance he could get. That was why he had seized the Renhuang sword will, and why he had come here today. His talent may be limited, but his will was not. Moreover, he was not as untalented as he had been in the past. He had received a swordmaster's sword and had fought with it. He had felt the true divine path and knew what it was like. Now, he wanted to once again seize the chance to feel it. Wuchen. Yi Futian looked towards where Yi Wuchen was fighting. His heart was in turmoil. He and Yi Wuchen had walked this path together. They had come from the land of the 100 kingdoms to here. He knew him very well. He knew why Yi Wuchen was doing this. Yi Wuchen's state of mind was probably even tougher than his own. Di Hao frowned. Was it really taking this long to defeat Yi Wuchen? Also, was Yi Wuchen crazy? If he pushed himself so hard it might have negative effects on him. And the Battle of the Crimson River did not permit killing, so why was Yi Wuchen being like this? He waved his hands and suddenly, more sword will gathered together. Brilliant swords of Kasaipa cut through the air and fell towards Yi Wuchen. Swords appeared around Yi Wuchen, but they had great difficulty blocking the attack of the swords of Kasaipa. The dragon-patterned cauldron continued to press downward. Di Hao said coldly, "If you keep this up, you will be destroyed once your defenses collapse, and you will have no one to blame but yourself. At that time, no one will be able to say that I killed you on purpose." Yi Wuchen was resisting so doggedly that he had to keep increasing the power of his attacks. Once Yi Wuchen collapsed, all his defenses would collapse as well. In that instant, the destructive power would be too great for him to escape. But at that point, Di Hao wouldn't be able to control it. Yi Wuchen heard what Di Hao had said, but he still squeezed his eyes shut. His swords were still there, even as blood oozed from his brow. It was truly a shocking sight. But he had already come this far. A true warrior of the sword did not retreat. He remembered his master's words. A swordsman is neither proud nor impatient. A swordsman is fearless and dauntless. A swordsman's original nature does not change. It stretches as far as the eye can see. He did not have the potential that Yi Futian did. He had only his one teacher. At the Fuyun sword clan, a teacher had preached the way of swordsmanship to him and taught him how to become a swordsman. After he died, his last thread of sword will had gone into him and given him a message. He thought of his master's death and the destruction of the Lu kingdom. There were so many evil people in this world. But at the same time, there were swordsmen like his master, and cultivators like the sword master of Lihan, who had shown him the road of swordsmanship cultivation. One day, he would cleanse the world of evildoers with sword in hand. His swords, though broken and destroyed, seemed to be endless, and they went from moving slowly to extremely fast. Di Hao frowned as he saw more and more swords coming into being constantly, and even extending wildly. Swords were even starting to appear around him. At that moment, Yi Wuchen felt that everything in all the vast world was filled with swords. Di Hao had asked, "How many swords do you have?" At that moment, Yi Wuchen's voice rang through the air. "I have infinite swords." As he said this, infinite swords were truly born, enveloping heaven and earth. Up in the sky, the wind whistled through the clouds as sword will descended, shaking the world. On the banks of the Crimson River, everyone looked up with trembling hearts. It seemed like he was going to break through to the Saint Plain. It was not uncommon for this to happen during the Battle of the Crimson River. It had happened many times in history. But no one had thought that Yi Wuchen would be the one to do it. Yi Wuchen, who no one had any great expectations for, was actually going to break through to the next level. He was going to take his first step onto the divine path. This battle had no rules. From the moment when they stepped onto the battlefield, the regional palace would only accept the last one left. Therefore, even if you became a saint during the battle, you could continue to fight. On the path of cultivation, luck was an important factor. Moreover, with so many top figures on the battlefield, how could they prevent them from becoming saints? The regional palace only cared about results. Futian was stunned at first. Then a bright smile appeared on his face. He would never have thought that after he became a saint, among Yuxing, Wuchen, the three brothers, Huangjioga and many others, the first one to break through to the saint level would be Wuchen. Of course, this did not mean that Wuchen was more talented than them. The Great Path had no system of seniority. But no matter what, Wuchen had taken this first step in spite of his limited talent. This was truly a wonder. And the path of cultivation was full of wonders. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Someone becoming a saint had the potential to influence the outcome of the battle and upset the balance. Someone becoming a saint had the potential to influence the outcome of the battle and upset the balance. This was especially true since everyone in previous instances of the Battle of the Crimson River had already been outstanding fighters. Once they became a saint, they could sweep away all opponents. Therefore, in previous battles of the Crimson River, it had not necessarily been a good thing to become a saint during the battle. And sure enough, many gazes fell upon Wuchen at that moment. A cold light flashed in Xingqiu and Xiangnan's eyes, two of the people who were most favored to win. It was not that they bore any ill will towards Wuchen. It was just that him becoming a saint during the battle would affect them. In light of this situation, they would have to deal with him before he completed his transformation into a saint. There was still a period in which he would need to comprehend the divine path, be baptized in the divine catastrophe, and then wholly step onto the divine path. This period was often fatal to those who were becoming saints unless they gave up. If they didn't, they would probably be affected by the divine catastrophe. At that moment, Wuchen's sword will had cut through the assault of the swords of Kasaipa. The powerful sword will smashed into the dragon-patterned cauldron high in the sky, causing it to shake incessantly. The mighty sword will wrapped around Wuchen. Wuji swords appeared around him, covering the battlefield. It seemed that a catastrophe of swordsmanship was descending. The light of catastrophe blended with the red sky, making everything seem extremely oppressive and frightening. Wuchen felt all the eyes on him. He knew that now that he had started the divine catastrophe, others would start paying attention to him. Those who had not cared about him before would now want to make him be the first to flee the field. "This is your chance to step onto the divine path. You should leave the field," said Xiangnan to Wuchen. The fact that he was becoming a saint did not mean much to him. As a son of Emperor Xiang, he did not have any so-called respect for those who were becoming saints. As far as he was concerned, it did not matter who among them became a saint first. The goal of this battle was to enter the regional palace. Wuchen looked at Xiangnan, and his eyes were as sharp as swords. He then looked towards Yusheng. If he fled now, would Yusheng be able to make it to the end? As Wuchen hesitated, the divine catastrophe had gathered together and had arrived. Xiangnan walked towards him. He stepped into the air, reached out, and made a grasping motion. In a flash, a terrifying scene appeared in the air above Wuchen's head. A divine figure could faintly be made out. It looked like a god. The figure stretched out all its fingers and pressed downward, forming a giant golden palm print in the sky. It rushed down to crush Wuchen. The sword will around Wuchen shrieked as it rushed up to resist. It collided with the palm print, and intense golden light burst from it. There seemed to be a light curtain flowing around it, slapping away the sword will. It continued downward towards Wuchen. Wuchen stretched out his single arm and pointed into the sky. His countless swords melded into one, a giant sword that smashed into the onrushing palm print. As the sword and the palm print collided, there was an explosion of brilliant golden light. Xiangnan looked indifferent. He glanced over the scene with eyes full of dazzling light that shone deeply within them. He put his hands out in front of him and formed a special seal. The divine figure was like a shadow of Renhuang in the shape of Xiang Nan. The seal went out, and suddenly the figure was surrounded by a 5-clawed golden dragon. Its massive claws swept downward, blotting out the sun as they tried to swallow Yi Futian up. Boom! A loud noise rang out as the massive sword was pressed down. "Your swordsmanship is not bad," said Xiang Nan. "Since you've seized the chance to become a saint, you should stop here. You won't ever get a better chance than this." Yi Wuchen had taken the lead at the Battle of the Crimson River, being the first to seize the opportunity to comprehend the Great Path. But he was not the strongest one there. In fact, he was the weakest. Before he could become a saint, he would need to increase his strength. Staying on the battlefield would be foolish. That was, unless he was the best cultivator on the battlefield. But obviously, Xiang Nan did not think he was. Seeing the great pressure that Yi Wuchen was under, Huang Jioge, who had repelled Dong Chen, rose into the air. A dazzling radiance bloomed as he pulled back his bowstring. The Renhuang bow had 9 arrows on it, and they were locked onto Xiang Nan. At the moment that he let the arrows fly, there was an ear-splitting noise that overpowered everything. The powerful arrows were able to shoot through the Great Path itself. Xiang Nan glanced at Huang Jioge, but at that moment, a figure stood between the two of them. It was Xing Chou, who was the favorite to win the Battle of the Crimson River. Brilliant light bloomed from him, making him dazzling to behold. He stood there casually, like a god of war. He looked unshakable. Xing Chou stepped forward, and a divine golden light curtain swept out from him. The overpowering arrows cut through the air and slammed into the light curtain, making a horrible noise. The air around them trembled fiercely. The arrows pierced through the light curtain bit by bit, seemingly able to destroy the will within it. But Xing Chou made a grabbing motion, causing another loud noise. A giant palm print grabbed up all the arrows and snapped them. Xing Chou did not care about Yi Wuchen, but if he entered the Saint Plane, things would be different. He naturally needed to stop him. Huang Jioge stepped forward, the power sweeping out from his Renhuang body. He wielded the Renhuang sword. A majestic will swept out from him, striking towards Xing Chou with majestic purpose. But Xing Chou glanced at him indifferently. The descendant of Renhuang, who had just barely comprehended the Tao, wanted to attack him? That was like an ant trying to shake a tree. An extremely tall figure appeared behind him, looking like a god of war and filled with a sense of limitless power. Seeing Huang Jioge striking towards him with the Renhuang sword, Xing Chou stepped into the air. The air around him trembled fiercely, and beams of brilliant light bloomed from him, seeming to resonate with the great worldly path. It seemed that everything in this area was his to use. The battlefield illusions around Huang Jioge shattered wildly, and the god of war behind Xing Chou slammed its fist downward. The great path was suddenly integrated into its fist, and it seemed that the limitless power of the great path was behind this attack. It slammed directly into Huang Jioge's Renhuang sword. A destructive storm swept out as the fist and the Renhuang sword collided. An overpowering force tried to split the fist apart, but terrible beams of light burst upon Huang Jioge's body. The violent fist sent Huang Jioge flying backward. Xing Chou still looked indifferent. The lofty and mighty god of war once again struck out with its fist towards Huang Jioge as he flew away. In a flash, countless fists were stretching out beside it, pressing through the air. Huang Jioge looked up into the sky. He felt like his opponent's fists were everywhere, and had become one with the heavenly path. The violent attacks fell upon him, and he continued to be sent flying backward until he fell upon the battle platform beside the Crimson River with a thud. The wind howled as even stronger fists fell from the sky, crushing down along with the god of war. Huang Jioge looked up and saw that the god of war had the great path within it, and his heart trembled slightly. It seemed that he was nowhere near strong enough. Boom! There was a loud noise as Huang Jioge's body bent until he was nearly lying on the ground. His face was pale as he spat out a mouthful of blood. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Yi Wuchen's situation was dire as well. Xiang Nan's attacks were powerful, and the catastrophe of the Great Path was gathering together. It seemed like it could descend upon him at any moment. Di Hao also chose that moment to launch his attack on Yi Wuchen. The bell and cauldron rang, and his sword Qi cut towards him, cutting through his defenses. The swords of Kasaipa cut directly through Yi Wuchen's body, and blood stained his robes. "Get out of her," said Xiangnan coldly. Suddenly, he struck out with his giant hand, slamming Yi Wuchen to the ground. Everyone watching from the riverbank trembled within their hearts. The moment of becoming a saint was a sacred time for any cultivator. But here on this battlefield by the Crimson River, it was treated as an abnormality and brutally suppressed. Boom! There was a loud noise as the catastrophe of the Great Path descended, piercing into Yi Wuchen's body. His flesh and spiritual will were bathed in sword will. His body trembled slightly. The attacks had seriously wounded him, and so as far as he was concerned, this was a bad time to face the divine catastrophe. Yusheng naturally saw what was going on over there. Over on his side of the battlefield, Kong Xian and Kong Zhan were launching violent attacks on him. 9-colored light shot down, its power shaking heaven and earth, slamming into him time after time. It was truly shocking to behold. At that moment, Yusheng swept out his arms, sending Kong Xian and Kong Zhan flying back. But a divine bird was swooping towards his head with its talons. It was Jialo Feng. He stretched out his left arm to block in front of him, and Jialo Feng's talons raked across it, trying to tear it apart. But Yusheng's other hand shot out like a bolt of lightning, grabbing the golden rock's talons. Bang! He stepped into the air as the golden rock struggled wildly, trying to break out of Yusheng's grip. But Yusheng was as powerful as a demon, and he suddenly threw the rock towards the ground. The golden rock tumbled downward, but he suddenly spat a golden sword from his mouth. Yusheng covered his eyes with his arm. The wind blew over them as they both fell towards the ground. He raised his arms, and with a loud noise, he slammed Jialo Feng into the ground. And before he could do anything, Yusheng stepped on his stomach, grabbing his golden wings. He began to pull his feathers out one by one, causing Jialo Feng to scream in pain. Yusheng ignored his cries. He looked up at Kong Xian and Kong Zhan in the sky. The ground shook wildly as he charged towards where Yi Wuchen was. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Upon the battlefield by the Crimson River, Jialo Feng was bleeding golden blood and crying out in pain. Upon the battlefield by the Crimson River, Jialo Feng was bleeding golden blood and crying out in pain. Kong Xian and Kong Zhan looked furious as Yusheng stood upon Jialo Feng and plucked out his golden feathers, throwing them to the ground. It was a shocking sight. This guy was a madman on the battlefield. No matter what, they could not shake him. Kong Zhan's figure flashed towards Yusheng, pursuing him. He had a dark look on his face. Kong Xian looked at her brother and moved forward at the same time. "Get off the battlefield," she said to Jialo Feng. Jialo Feng was badly injured. There wouldn't be much point in him staying any longer. There was a flash of hatred in Jialo Feng's proud eyes. As a member of the Jialo noble family, this was a grave humiliation to him. The wild Yusheng had trampled him to the ground and then rushed to the aid of Yi Wuchen. Up in the sky, Xiangnan stretched out his hand, and the divine 5-clawed dragon struck once again with a roar. Its claws blotted out the sun and covered up half the sky as they sliced towards Yusheng and Yi Wuchen. He had already told Yi Wuchen that he was not strong enough to seize this opportunity that had been offered by the Great Path, as he would not be able to enter the regional palace. And since Yi Wuchen was hesitating, he would make the decision for him. At this juncture, if he were injured while facing the divine catastrophe, he would probably die. If Yi Wuchen were not willing to give up, this chance he had to become a saint would become a disaster for him. Yusheng looked up at the charging golden dragon with cold eyes. Dark golden light flowed from him. He thrust his fist into the air, and a huge palm print shot up into the sky, as powerful as the sun, blocking the dragon's claws in mid-air. Xiangnan looked indifferent when Yusheng appeared. He had seen Yusheng's combat ability. He was very strong. In terms of theoretical power, Xingqiu was the only person on the battlefield who could resist him. He pressed down with his fist yet again, and suddenly, the divine golden 5-clawed dragon circled in the air with a roar. There was a loud sound as its claws pressed down on the palm print, shattering it, and then continued downward. However, down below mighty demonic power billowed from Yusheng, and an endless demonic airflow appeared, rushing towards his body and making him even more terrifying. It was like a demon had possessed him. His body became larger and more powerful, like a demon that covered the world. His dark eyes were full of coldness, and a demonic batleax appeared in his hands. He looked up and stepped forward, making the ground tremble beneath his feet so fiercely that it seemed like it would split open. He rushed into the air with his batleax slicing towards the sky. The golden claws were split down the middle and shattered in an instant. The powerful body continued upwards, bursting through the golden dragon's abdomen, splitting it in two along the way, then continuing towards the Renhuang-like figure. Light flashed on the batleax as he swung it, and the figure immediately dissipated as if it had never existed. Yuxing turned and looked at Xiang Nan and saw the Renhuang figure reappear behind him, as tall and mighty as a god. At the same time, Huang Jiuge and Qin Zhuan had stopped fighting and came to Yi Wuchen's side to protect him from the divine catastrophe. Because of this, Xing Chou and Seven Sins found themselves without opponents, and so they rushed over there as well. At that moment, Yu Sheng and the rest of them seemed to have become targets for everyone as Yi Wuchen tried to cross through the divine catastrophe. The divine catastrophe continued to descend upon Yi Wuchen, baptizing his spiritual will and his body. The divine light of the great path flowed over him, but his eyes were still open, looking as sharp as swords as he watched the figures around him. Seeing that Yi Wuchen was still trying to overcome the divine catastrophe, Xiang Nan and the others hesitated no longer. Xiang Nan drew a seal with both hands, and suddenly, a huge face appeared in the sky. I looked like the face of Renhuang. The divine golden five-clawed dragon roared, and there was not just one of them. And incomparable purple and golden lightning appeared in the sky, like the lightning of the highest heavens. Thunderbolts descended, filling the air around Yu Sheng and the others. This was just as wild as the divine catastrophe and would kill everything around it. Yu Sheng rushed up into the sky, his demonic figure filling the above Yi Wuchen and the others. He stood there mightily, and there seemed to be a gravitational force that pulled all the destructive power onto him. The incredibly terrifying divine lightning struck, and dazzling thunderbolts flashed across Yu Sheng's body. His armor seemed about to break, but his body was like a black hole, swallowing up all the violet and golden light and the power of the thunderbolts. Many five-clawed dragons rushed down along with the lightning, roaring furiously, trying to crush Yu Sheng. Even someone as strong as Yu Sheng was continuously shaken by their assault, and his body seemed about to shatter. But at that moment his demonic battle-axe disappeared, and he reached into the air with both hands. His huge body turned into a black hole vortex that swallowed up all the power around him. The onrushing dragons roared as they were pulled into the vast abyss, falling bit by bit into the mighty demonic will. At that moment, Yu Sheng was like a bottomless black hole, swallowing up the destructive divine lightning and the five-clawed golden dragons. More violent dark magic roared and surged around his body, blocking everyone's field of vision. Even their spiritual wills could not penetrate it. It seemed like he was trying to turn the whole battlefield into a demon world. Xiang Nan frowned. All of his attacks had been swallowed up? Had this cultivator of the demonic path cultivated his path of devouring up to this level? Moreover, that mighty demonic power made him feel some pressure. Beside him, Dong Chen seemed extraordinarily calm. There was no expression on his face. When he had come forth from Daily Mountain, he had wanted his name to resonate throughout the Dali dynasty and defeat the cultivators of Dali Academy, thereby becoming the imperial advisor's disciple and the most powerful figure below the saint level. But Seventh Swordsman's appearance had made all his preparations count for nothing, to the point that now his state of mind was affected. Now, he had come to the Crimson Dragon realm and the Battle of the Crimson River, but he could not beat this Yi Wuchen, and he had even become a saint. Yu Sheng was so powerful that he felt he was no match for him. It seemed that Seventh Swordsman was not the only one who was much stronger than him. This made him feel frustrated. Even the ones by Seventh Swordsman's side were out of his league. He stepped forward, and swords of Kasaipa rushed towards Yu Sheng. Yu Sheng's dark eyes seemed able to throw people into the abyss and kneel before him. He did not block the swords of Kasaipa, as golden lightning snaked through the mighty demonic power like leaves on a tree, then disappeared within it. Di Hao's will was connected to his sword, and he had just started to be able to perceive it, but soon he felt that his will was being forcibly scraped away. His connection to his sword was completely lost. A deep roar rang out through the dark airflow. A black, five-clawed demon dragon appeared in the air in front of Yu Sheng and wrapped around him. Terrifying black lightning bloomed with world-destroying light. The swords of Kasaipa turned black as well and swallowed up the destructive sword will. It seemed that this power did not belong to Yu Sheng, but rather to Xiang Nan and Di Hao. But at that moment, it was all demonized and put to Yu Sheng's use. This is not the path of devouring. This is demonization. As a prince of Renhuang, Xiang Nan was naturally a man of broad experience. This kind of overbearing demonic power was extremely difficult to cultivate and comprehend. It was even more fearsome than the path of devouring since it was, in fact, the evolution of the path of devouring. Could it be that Yu Sheng was the descendant of a demon emperor? Boom! Yu Sheng strode through the sky, and the very air trembled, resonating with the earth. Boom! 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 He continued forward, and the great path seemed to be pressed down under his feet. A demonic figure that covered the sky appeared, and its dark demonic airflow blotted out the sun. It seemed to be endless, and that it would swallow up the entire battlefield by the Crimson River. Every step of the footwork of Xianyuan seemed to trample on Xiang Nan's heart, making it beat wildly. Seeing the demonic figure rushing towards him wildly, his expression finally became serious, as if he was facing a great foe. Crush him! Xiang Nan quickly formed a seal as he spoke the spell. The power of the great path descended as many gigantic written characters fell. However, the black dragon roared as it twisted around Yu Sheng, shattering the falling characters. "Stop!" called Yu Sheng. The sound of an explosion rang out, and it seemed that the heavens would collapse. The Renhuang figure that covered the sky seemed to become real and stepped towards Yu Sheng's demonic figure. It was as if Renhuang had manifested in the world, and would suppress everything for him. At that moment, Xiang Nan was covered in sweat as if he was under great pressure. Boom! Yu Sheng finally slowed down as the striking black dragon and the sharp swords were all crushed under the foot of the summoned Renhuang figure. His footsteps continued to slow as the tall figure stamped down on him, trying to crush him. Not only did it contain the power of the great path, but it also had divine majesty. It could not be resisted. Boom! There was a loud sound, and Yu Sheng felt that he could not move. But he looked up into the sky, his demonic eyes looking as fearless as ever. Even if the sovereign path could put this much pressure on him, would he really let himself be crushed here? He had studied the demonic path. He defied the laws of gods and men. Boom! The dark airflow gathered together, and a massive demonic figure appeared, seeming to overlap with Yu Sheng's body, making him into a true demon god. He gave a great cry, and heaven and earth seemed about to collapse. The demon's massive palm print lashed out, covering the gigantic Renhuang figure's face and slamming into its head. Xiang Nan groaned and his face turned pale. The demon continued forward, and another loud noise rang out. The summoned Renhuang body shattered. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. His face was ashen. At that moment, a huge hand stretched out. It was the demon's hand. It grabbed him and pulled him up into the air. Xiang Nan tried to escape, but no matter how hard he struggled, he could not move a bit. Even as a descendant of Renhuang, at this moment, he seemed insignificant. He looked like he was in his death throes. The demonic power surged, and the powerful demon slammed its hand into the ground with a great cry, slamming Xiang Nan into the ground just like crushing an ant. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.